Officer Wilson told the black woman in the car, "I smell something suspicious coming from," in a very stern voice. He stated, "Zora, the black woman, remains eerily calm," as the automobile got out. Her eyes used the same tactical awareness to calculate every element of her environment. That has preserved her life in war zones throughout the globe. "Officer, with all due respect, I refuse to allow a search of—" "You people always think you're above the law," Zora, my car, said. Law snarled and slammed her out of the car, but Zora remained still. Wilson's stance stiffens and he asks, "Why are you making this difficult?" "Want me to complicate your life because I enjoy doing it." His hand is moving to rest on his holster, particularly those who are unsure of their position. Wilson believed he was incomplete. Like the others, this black lady may be overshadowed by his dominance and bigotry, but he was unaware of his identity, really tampering with him. He was unaware that Zora was a lady with authority over him. Never be able to get in touch with, "Have you ever been treated unfairly by a higher authority?" Share yours. We dive into the tale. Share your experience with us in the comments section. To combat racism, prejudice, and injustice, click the subscribe and like buttons. Tell us in the comments where you're viewing from. This is where it all began. Commander Zora Daniels drove through well-known neighborhoods in her silver vehicle. At 35, she conducts herself with the attitude that she hasn't seen in almost 5 years. Conspicuous accuracy, derived from military discipline, back straight, eyes continuously observing her surroundings and making deliberate, effective moves. You are aware that the reserved lady who quit high school is now in charge of one of the Navy's most prestigious SEAL teams. They treat her as if she were just another guest staying at perfect 10 and 2 on the wheel. After been taught to keep control in the past, old habits die hard, chaos. Zora is shown in the dashboard shot getting a commendation while wearing a uniform. Millfield, the place where she was raised, is a world different from these peaceful streets. The courthouse where her grandfather used to work hasn't altered much. As a youngster, she had been instructed to always talk when working as a janitor at the police station, showing deference to the police at the community center, where her mother was a piano instructor. Most people are unaware of the changes that have occurred since the budget was reduced, such as the widening gap between who gets safeguarded and who is suspected in this town. New companies thrive on while the South Side suffers, the North Side welcomes new arrivals based on their appearance. Zora observed the patrol car driven by Officer Blake Wilson before he even turned on his lights. It's hardly strange that he's now interested in her car because she's been pulled over in her hometown. But now she's only come to see her aunt after finishing 3 weeks of well-deserved leave, following months of a secret mission abroad. However, Zora indicates and pulls over when the flashing lights appear without a siren. By the book, she is already reaching for her license and registration. Officer Wilson is always by the book, and his hand resting on his holster is an unnecessary pose for a routine. He requests a traffic stop license and registration without even trying to be polite. "Officer." Zora's voice is firm as he explains why he pulled her over. "Could you please tell me what the infraction was?" Wilson claims that even though you rolled to the stop sign back there, you were polite but forceful. The fact that Zora stopped completely, counted the 3 seconds before moving forward, and then gave her paperwork without dispute. Thus, there's no need in opposing him after years of military service. Wilson studied her license with strategy, which has taught her to pick her conflicts carefully, increasing suspicion that you're not from this area anymore and are only visiting relatives. "Sir, I'm on." Keep his eyes focused while he sweeps her windows with his flashlight. There is nothing to conceal or discover across the spotless interior. Officer Wilson Zora states calmly that there is contraband in my car while noting his name tag. "I am aware of my rights." Wilson approaches and speaks in a close-up. Whisper, "Your type always assumes you're so intelligent that you know your rights." He glances around to see whether anybody is observing before proceeding. But something flashes in my mind tonight, and I determine who has rights, who goes home, and who goes to jail. Wilson's ire at being questioned, particularly by a legal expert. He insists that someone who isn't intimidated get out of the car now. Zora complies with his taser, which you people constantly try to complicate. Her careful and precise hand motions are constantly evident, following the same pattern. Never give people cause to believe that they are in danger in unfriendly areas around the world. Wilson commands, "Turn around and put your hands on the car." His voice rises as a second patrol car pulls up. "I've dealt with plenty of up ones like you by the time I'm done," she says, leaning in close enough for only she to hear them. She follows the stance and breathes in a balanced manner. "I wish you" had paid her some respect, managed to protect herself after 12 years of martial training by yelling at her. After years of strict discipline that kept her motionless, Wilson purposefully ran into her. As when he got close, he abruptly stumbled back, grabbing his face. "Strike me," he yells at his oncoming coworker. "I need back." Zora's hands are still stretched out on her car's hood and she hasn't moved 1 inch, visible to the approaching police on the dashboard camera. "I didn't touch you, officer." "Stop talking, Wilson," she said gently, loud enough for the cameras to record. "You are being arrested for attacking an officer while wearing handcuffs, and snarls are pushing her hard against the car." Tighten around her wrists, Zora's thoughts were focused on calculated observation rather than rage or injustice. Preparing. Have you ever seen or encountered an abusive authority figure? What would what you did in Zora's case? Leave a comment below with your opinions and click the subscribe button right now, because what follows will demonstrate precisely what occurs when a dishonest individual frames the incorrect person. Since Zora was a teenager, the Millfield police station system has remained unchanged. The American flag, the flickering fluorescent lights, and the worn blue wall shanging lifelessly in the corner, but she can now view it from the opposite direction. Most individuals in Zora's situation would be terrified behind bars, but Commander Daniels isn't. Security cameras shift as eyes carefully search the room, documenting exits, rotations. She does the same tactical evaluation in an enemy region. 3-2 booking stations, 1 security camera with a blind hole, and on duty. Cops Officer Wilson strides into the station near the water cooler, his face already displaying symptoms of redness where he would say Zora hit him and gave him a live one here. He alleges that Zora shoved him forward and attacked an officer during a routine. Sergeant Miller stopped and looked up from his desk, his face changing from one of indifference to one of discomfort, as he took in Zora's calm expression. "When she hit you?" Miller inquired, raising an eyebrow a little. Wilson responds that they don't appear to be the kind. She was detected using drugs too frequently by the phony BV aid that reverberated around the station. Zora stayed mute during the violent traffic stop, which required a great deal of restraint to bring her in. She began training years ago in the intense heat required to become a Navy SEAL. She was so frail that she stood in the icy Pacific surf for hours while teachers, you believe that this is suffering for her since she yelled in her face, attempting to shatter her. As hypothermia set in, the teacher exclaimed, "This isn't agony, this is merely pain, and discomfort are just momentary," as Wilson adds more details to his narrative to ever more dramatic lengths that the lesson also returns. This is only temporary suffering. "She attacked me using a combat maneuver," Wilson said, displaying an, "if the scenario weren't so serious, my exaggerated karate chop would be hilarious. Fortunately, I'm quick." Officer Diaz, who is only 25 years old and new to the job, reflexively looks between Wilson and, with increasing hesitancy, Zora observed what the others had overlooked. His hands showed no indications of having hit someone. There is no swelling or redness. Wilson vanished for half an hour, then reappeared with a tiny plastic bag and a victorious grin. "Take a look at what I discovered." Zora's eyes narrow gradually as he dumps the tablets on the booking counter, hidden in her car, making them rattle. "Has been well maintained since the day she purchased it, with military accuracy, and none of those drugs were there." Wilson discusses the unpredictable behavior prior to announcing unlawful prescription medicines. Wilson responds as well. Sergeant Miller scowled a little. "You checked the car after the assault had probable cause. As they took pictures and took Zora Officer Diaz's fingerprints, they immediately detected a strange stench. Additionally, the mechanical accuracy with which she adheres to instructions is flawless. Despite being in shackles, The military stance and situational awareness that almost Diaz informed her in a hushed voice that most people would call from beyond Wilson's hearing. Supernatural, you can get your phone call. Zora contacted a number she knows by heart, speaking in front of her spouse, family, and a lawyer. Lieutenant Commander Daniels reported a delay in the exact wording of the clip. Millfield Municipal Station is the planned check-in point. When she spoke in codes throughout the conversation, Charlie, the desk officer, believed she was Diaz, was talking to a cousin when he observed the military precision in her speech and the codes that seemed to be ingrained in her during the booking process. There was a casual interaction, but the disdain was systematic. Each degrading comment greeted Zora's with a nice smile for the photo. Honey. 2 hours later, in complete quiet, her eyes recording faces, names, and processes, sitting across from Zora. In a dimly lit consulting room is Jeremy Wells, an overworked public attorney. His tie is too many instances and not enough sleep have left his eyes bloodshot and discolored. Miss Daniels, the scenario is, it's really simple. He's hardly looking at her file, which is excellent, but attacking an officer. I didn't attack anyone, Zora, so these drug possession allegations are significant. Wells had previously heard that such pills were planted after being politely explained. After 10 years in this system, criminal customers from innocent ones all sound similarly to him, officer. Wilson has recorded injuries, which he disputes. The report claims that you got confrontational during a routine traffic check, but it is untrue. The DA is willing to make a concession and enter a guilty plea to a lesser charge of resisting arrest. Zora doesn't respond to the assault and drug allegations after 6 months of probation. I hesitantly entered a guilty plea for something I didn't commit, Miss Daniels. You must recognize the fact that you are testifying against a police officer. Do you believe that a jury in this community will, Mr. Wells? I think Zora leans forward a little because I know reality better than most of my professional life has been spent evaluating threats and estimating the likelihood that I won't take a plea bargain when Wells departs. Zora gets upset with a client who refuses to see the logic and starts mentally mapping the case against her every inconsistencies and any procedural errors. This goes beyond her self-defense. These days, the focus is on exposing a system that Wilson has openly abused in the past. Wilson sits with Karen Eisen, the assistant district attorney, is shown as a scary and unstable woman who assaulted him without provocation. She was unquestionably using a substance that he maintains showed the typical symptoms of stimulant misuse. Angry, combative, and then suddenly, bang, attacks me. Larson nods. Taking notes and constructing the argument just from Wilson's statements is just another cog in a well-oiled machine. However, machines sometimes malfunction, and this one is going to have a wrench. The station phone rings, at precisely 19:30 hours, signaling the arrival of Sergeant Miller responses, his face shifting from indifference to perplexity to worry. I get that, sir. But I didn't know her standing. He looks at the cells where Zora observes everything motionless. Yeah, sir. I will personally investigate it right once. Miller hangs up, looking at the phone as if it were about to bite him. Diaz yells Zora Daniels. Wilson, sir, was accused of violence by the person who approved her arrest. Miller scratches his face wearily during a traffic stop, suggesting that there may be a problem. Diaz's eyes widened as she waited for the Naval Special Warfare Command to inquire why one of their officers skipped a planned inspection. Military Miller murmurs something that Military Wilson failed to convey, much more intricate. The device has began to splutter, and the first domino has started to fall in the Millfield County Courthouse's Courtroom 3 for the preliminary. The state's hearing against Zora Daniels started on schedule, according to 30-year bench veteran Judge Harmon presides with a practice deficit at age 68, believing he has seen it all. Officer Blake Wilson enters the stand with practiced assurance, his uniform pressed against him, and his expression serious. Officer Wilson, could you kindly explain the performance he has performed several times before? The incidents of yesterday afternoon, Wilson touched his face with a prop. Makeup done with care intensifies the redness that ought to have subsided by now. Stopped the defendant for running a stop sign, as is customary, but as soon as I could see something wasn't quite right when I got closer to the car. Occurs as Wilson developed his story about stopping an uncooperative suspect on a regular basis. When I urged her to get out of the car, I smelled something fishy. Wilson stated that he smacked the practice with his voice when she grew hostile. She blasted me with what I can only characterize as some sort of notes of righteous wrath. He displays a crazy military combat method for the court reenactment of what an untrained combatant would never accomplish. I was hurt in my skills allowed me to use little force to restrain her, protecting her face and neck. Despite the danger, Zora observed calmly from her seat next to her public defender of most defendants, yet her eyes followed small movements with the deliberate intensity of someone planning an enemy camp. Exchanges between the clerk and the prosecutor over the exit of the judge's many expressions during the following search of Wilson's car as her account became more detailed found prescription drugs in her name that were illegally distributed. Jeremy Wells's public. The defender's cross-examination is at best superficial, and he hardly took any notes. Officer Wilson responded to the question of whether my client had a prescription for these drugs, which she did not supply. Zora bends down and whispers something, and there are no more questions. Wells dismissed Judge Harmon with a contemptuous shake of his head. Yet he has presided over. Wilson's arrests are excessive, and he supports his prejudiced cop. Did you seek medical attention after the defendant attacked you using what seemed to be a trained fighting style as you testified? Wilson is hesitant to get treatment for his injuries. For a short while I've been prepared to deal with worse, and this supposed. Have you ever used this combat method before? Not particularly, Your Honor. Said that her stance shifted when Zoral was summoned to submit her plea. Subtly straightened, and her voice had the calm authority of someone when she spoke. Wilson and the judge believed she was much like their previous victims, used to being obeyed, and would have to deal with unjust condemnation. But that didn't occur as soon as Zora spoke to this black woman, is unlike any victim they have ever experienced and will completely shock them. She firmly stated, "I'm not guilty, Your Honor." Yet she did it with such strong belief that Judge Harmon is influenced by the energy in the courtroom, examined her with fresh curiosity, Miss Daniels. Would you want anything? Zora felt to herself that now was her moment to take action and take control before her lawyer could make a decision. Intervene. Zora said straight to the court, "Your Honor, I am not a flight risk. I have 12 years of honorable service to my nation and will continue to do so. I have no criminal past. The accusations made against me are false, as will be shown in, since the defendant assaulted a police officer, the prosecutor naturally leaps, up to Your Honor. Officer and was discovered in possession of illicit prescription drugs. The state asks that bail be set at $50,000. Judge Harmon's eyes are still fixed on Zora. Which military branch is she in, miss? You are honored by the Daniels Navy, where you are currently a lieutenant commander. Wilson moved as jaws dropped wide in terror, unaware that she possessed that ability. Unfortunately, this was not included in his background check, and the judge inquired, "I'm not at your current assignment. You have the right to openly debate the details of my task, Your Honor, but if needed, my superior officer can confirm my status." The first card has been played, but her whole hand has not. Judge Heron nods slowly, even though it was near enough to alter the game. Nothing he could do again. But this black lady is powerful enough to change everything. Bail is at $5,000 in the subsequent instance. The prosecutor's protest was spoken as the judge's gavel falls as Zora rose, but her expression has altered. Instead of passively observing, she now, after posting, the hunter awoke in the courthouse corridor under controlled circumstances. Bail Zora called her aunt twice, the first being quick and comforting, and the second being longer, and loaded with to a number that isn't listed in any public directory with military precision. Wilson made the fatal mistake of approaching Zora because he couldn't accept that his strategy hadn't worked out as planned. Waiting. "Outside the courthouse, you think you're smart, don't you?" he hisses, encroaching on her personal space without her knowledge. That she is following his every move with her peripheral vision, dropping your military service like if it were significant. This is far from done, as Zora's response is measured. "Officer, Wilson, please remain cool. I think it would be better for you to step back or else you'll assault me once again," he said, attracting the attention of "no one will trust you over me" passersby. "I've been on the force for 15 years. I haven't assaulted anybody in years, and you're just another jerk with a fancy tale. Officer Wilson," but I think he missed her because of preparation. The hand lazily resting at her lapel failed to notice the little recording device that was recording what he said. "Believe it counts, since I've thrown away people far brighter than you. You'll be lucky if you're just dishonorably dismissed. I know judges and people in this town. This is my domain, prosecutors, and every threat and acknowledgement of Wilson also offers a flawless capture of corruption for later use. Sneer, you might. Want to see how your expensive automobile is doing at the impound yard? So irresponsible with personal property that items disappear or are damaged. What a disgrace." Zora permits herself the smallest smile in tactical warfare as he leaves, content with his fear. There is a rule that states that occasionally you have to wait for the adversary to move into a weak spot before attacking. Blake Wilson, a cop, just marched straight into her trap. Have you ever met someone who totally undervalued you? How did you respond? Tell us about it in the comments. Please click the subscribe button right away, because Commander Dan's next move isn't simply retaliation. It's within hours after Zora's release justice was done, and her hotel room's walls bore the clear structure of a case involving military intelligence. Every component is painstakingly mapped with precision in the files, timelines, and relationships, organized with the precision that results from years of high-risk procedures where the slightest details decide who survives and who passes away after 6 years. Zora had previously demonstrated exceptional proficiency in this type of job during advanced SEAL intelligence training. Whereas other trainees concentrated on direct action strategies, she showed a remarkable aptitude for piecing together bits of information into useful intelligence, and those same abilities now concentrate on officers. Blake Wilson's criminal history, prior court testimony, and financial activities, an image of an aggressive police officer starts to form. But when you know what to look for, the pattern of 17 arrests in the previous year is obvious and indicative of something worse. Striking parallels between traffic stops involving primarily minority defendants that led to narcotic searches counts that would be dropped in return, for guilty pleas to lesser counts were easily found in cars. Most people wouldn't notice the data about infractions, but Zora isn't. A tap on the door interrupts Officer Diaz is standing outside when she analyzes 3 brief taps that are just as planned. Even though he is still in uniform, his stance shows off-duty uneasiness. "I shouldn't be here," he adds, looking back as he walked in, but "Here you are, Zor," he responds coolly. Since something doesn't feel right, Diaz offered him a seat and took in the Wilson. "Said you made something up," but his eyes are widening, and he added, "You're really military, aren't you?" "I'm not sure what's going on, Lieutenant Commander, Naval Special Warfare occurring, but Wilson's arrest papers always show the same trend." Last month, I heard Diaz pause and then continue using the same allegations. When I inquired about his placing evidence in a suspect's vehicle, Sergeant Miller drew me aside and ordered me to ignore it. What I saw is that everything falls into place if I wanted to maintain my job. Miller was uneasy at the station for more reasons than simply doubt. Diaz slips a USB drive. Departmental records, arrest histories, and body cam footage are shown across the table. Never became evidence because I made copies before they vanished. Data support Zora's suspicions, but she was unable to demonstrate that Wilson's history of false accusations wasn't coincidental. In the silence of the night, she conducted an analysis that was focused, strategic, and lucrative. The connection's financial records revealed deposits to offshore accounts, a trend of defendants who were employed by a competing drug enterprise being targeted after specific arrests, while others went away with the pills. The same prescription drug that were hidden in her car had been taken in a raid 3 months prior, but it was never correctly reported in. Proof Wilson isn't simply a racist police officer misusing his position of authority. He's on someone's after hours of investigation. The trail ends with Marcus Reynolds, the proprietor of the same Marcus Reynolds, who is reported to supply half the county, has 3 nightclubs on the north side of town. The same Marcus Reynolds makes large contributions to the Police Benevolence Fund. Whose rivals are more unsettling when they are repeatedly detained by Officer Wilson? Records of people who attempted to thwart Todd Johnson's complaint. James Martinez was charged with further crimes against Wilson 3 years prior, before she retracted her statement, who unexpectedly lost video footage that contradicted Wilson's testimony, the video of his home being broken into prior to his trial, the intimidation and beyond Wilson. Corruption permeates the department as a whole. Sergeant Miller's name can be found on dozens of dubious evidence records. As Dawn breaks Zora's position, she assists in burying procedural infractions that would have revealed the conspiracy. Sergeant Miller and Reynolds meeting behind a closed door is the last picture on her board. Eatery, a picture taken by a local blogger who believed he was recording a casual gathering, but was really. Wilson sat at his station and took pictures of the corrupt machinery in motion. After a cursory search of personnel databases, Zora Daniels's name eventually yields a result for basic military service. Report Navy, as she stated, but there is nothing that suggests special operations. He snorts at the idea that she is anything other than an administrative officer at a desk job as an administrative expert, displaying the screen to an officer pencil pusher who is attempting to appear tough. He is unaware that Zora's actual service record is something he cannot obtain. He can't picture the sanitized version he's seeing since it's secret and hidden behind security clearances, purposefully created to hide her true function and skills. Wilson reclines in his chair. Trust was restored, allowing yet another defendant to breach the law, manipulate, but he was unaware that the trap was created. The proof was gathered, and Precision Commander Zora Daniels has developed a plan with the military, and she is no longer fighting for herself. Fighting for James Martinez, for Todd Johnson, for everyone Wilson hash-armed over his years of corruption. And when Navy SEALs engage in combat, they do it to win, not to participate. Without fanfare, the black SUV with government license plates and its lone occupant arrived at the Millfield Inn. Zora unlocks the door as Captain Richard Hargrove arrives in his fitted civilian outfit. Door with deliberate caution, then moves aside while grinning slightly. When one of my top officers is jailed, I hope to meet you in person. Captain. False accusations. I deviate from routine for the first time since her arrest. Zora's militaristic demeanor somewhat mitigates her commanding. When many questioned whether a woman could successfully finish the SEALs program, the officer who chose her for training brings a feeling of approval for her battle. Harrove looks over the investigative board with professional recognition. Your ability to acquire intelligence hasn't been quiet. This isn't exactly a peaceful moment, sir. Parg nods as he places the classified folder. Your remark prompted some questions at the desk, and it turns out that Officer Wilson has caught on the FBI radar prior to the folder containing Zora's lacking the formal records that turn suspicion into actionable bank data from intelligence Wilson that reveal mysterious transactions linked to certain arrests. Internal affairs accusations about known drug ties were ignored by empathetic superiors. You should speak with someone else regarding activity that exceeded state boundaries and came under federal authority. Just as Hargrove was checking his watch, there was a loud bang on the door. Commander Daniels' Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen inserts her JAG Corps insignia, which is visible on her immaculate uniform. Professionally, Chen nods. I've looked over your case's textbook outline, but they caused a number of procedural errors and chain of custody problems, with Officer Wilson's testimony regarding the purported evidentiary discrepancies throughout the next, how a well-planned military operation is carried out. Not with weapons and strategies, but Chen describes jurisdictional techniques using legal tactics and evidentiary chains. Authority, the specific legal structure that will reveal Wilson's misconduct, and the procedural criteria. We don't only wish to be fired, Zora clarifies, pointing to her board, that Wilson is a member of a bigger. Chen has a surgical approach that we will employ because these victims deserve justice. Following Wilson's admission of giving false testimony under oath, the preliminary hearing to spring the trap will present. He is forced by conflicting facts to either confess his lies or commit. Sergeant Miller, Carg GVE, says while looking at the connection charts, but what about perjury? Target Zora's additional explanation is crucial in demonstrating the system's MC nature. However, the plan becomes more than simply a defense tactic when the sun falls. Chen, however, will take Zora's public defender's position in a counteroffensive. intended to destroy the entire corrupt enterprise. Wilson won't go down without Hargrove making sure federal officials are ready whenever the local investigation opens. When Chen cautions that guys like him seldom fight, Zora responds, "I'm counting on it." Serene assurance that stands in sharp contrast to the impending storm they're about to unleash throughout town. The man walks calmly across his living room while holding a drink of alcohol. Despite the sanitized military, something about this case feels off, and the facade is breaking for the first time. Record, he discovered. Wilson's phone chimed, and he couldn't get rid of the sensation that Zora Daniels wasn't like his typical targets. Following Sergeant Miller's text message, "Follow the plan for tomorrow's hearing. Away like everyone else, but will the uncertainty that gnaws at him in an unusual way, and his typical tactics of intimidation, evidence manipulation, and procedural manipulation are not welcome. Although shortcuts have always been effective in the past, something about Daniels' poise in court, the way she looked at everything, fearlessly set up an instinct in him. Long disregarded, Wilson made his fateful choice as midnight drew near. If there's Wilson's unmarked motel parking lot was mostly empty, so he'll discover it himself. Zora Daniels has something to find. When a vehicle comes into room 214 and there are no lights, his police training takes over, arrives with the door. Tools prepared to quickly remove the lock that he doesn't. He was unable to see the military-grade camera, and the bespoke motion sensors that Zora had placed hours before is now filming everything he does, and the lock gives way to his tools, opening the door. Wilson enters the room quietly as flashlight rays sweep over the pitch-black space. Not only empty, but fully cleaned away with no inquiry board and no proof, only a solitary red light glowing. On a screen, no indication that Zora Daniels was ever present. Officer Wilson was searching for something with a gadget positioned close to the ceiling. The voice came from a speaker on Zora's quiet, eager voice, as though she had been anticipating this very moment. Wilson's face becomes pale as he acknowledges his deadly mistake. The trap wasn't scheduled to appear in court tomorrow. The trap just strolled straight into it from behind. Instead of police lights, the flashing lights in the parking lot are those of federal agents who are positioned precisely where Zora determined that they would have the best possible lines of sight in warfare. Ambush is more than simply an attack. It's about getting to know your adversaries so well that you can foresee their actions, influence their choices, and guide them in the precise direction you choose. Wilson stayed still as the extent of his error of judgment became evident. Was chasing Zora Daniels in Millfield County, but she wasn't. The courthouse has endured political and physical storms for more than a century, but the tempest is brewing inside. The hurdles it faces now could be different from those it had before Assistant District Attorney Karen. With increasing uneasiness on one side, Eisen looks at the contradictory documents on her desk. Officer Wilson's arrest report and evidence log are the same type of formulaic on. The other hand, a sealed mail was delivered, and she has been prosecuted several times previously. By courier revealing dashcam evidence that completely contradicts Wilson's stated testimony and service documents demonstrating that the defendant is not only a member of the military, but also a distinguished special, she mutters. Forces, this can't be right, and reaches for her phone to contact. It's rare for an officer to go straight to voicemail on the eve of Wilson is being questioned about his illicit admission, although he is unaware of this while testifying. His police credentials were briefly suspended as he entered motel room 214. Judge Raymond Harmon examines the evidence in his upcoming probe down the hall. In his with every document, Chambers' visage darkens after 30 years on the bench, giving him a sense of what cases are like, and this one is raising all the red flags. In his vast knowledge, the proof in front of him consists of time-stamped Wilson's own body camera footage, with gaps that exactly match. More concerning than the claimed assault and drug discovery are the statistics analysis revealing patterns in Wilson's arrests that contradict. Random chance-targeted demographics, identical accusations, cases ended mostly by plea. Your Honor, his clerk interrupts the lieutenant commander to discuss negotiations instead of trials. Chen from the Corps of Judge Advocate General is seeking recognition. As Judge Harmon, the defendant's counsel, raises a military eyebrow tomorrow. Attorneys don't normally involve themselves in civilian criminal proceedings unless something special is at play. Trevor Reynolds, Wilson's partner cop, sits uneasily across town in his cop car, phone pushed to his ear. See, I can't simply make up testimony. The body cam film doesn't support your claims, and Wilson's speech seems strained and frantic. Simply claim that your viewpoint didn't get everything and that you witnessed her acting aggressively. Blake, this is perjury. We're discussing the possibility of losing far more than just my badge. The despair in Wilson's voice was fresh the first time this case fell apart. The self-assured cop suddenly sounds like a guy observing his well-built world disintegrate as Zora meets in a little meeting room at the federal building along with Officer Diaz and two other witnesses, past defendants who had come into contact with Wilson's unscrupulous methods, but were too scared to speak up. But, you'll be safe now, Zora, informs them of her composed yet commanding demeanor. Federal witness protection if her meticulous preparation is essential, and it's not just about winning a case. About tearing down a system that has harmed dozens of innocent individuals, each piece of evidence. Witness statement and procedural record organized with Commander Lieutenant. She would arrange a hostage extraction with the same level of precision. Entering with a file, Commander Chen says, "We've found 3 further situations with all minorities, all traffic stops, all searches, and all identical patterns." Zora nodded, adding the same kind of contrived proof. Information to her case, which is already significant. The prosecution faces more than just the defendant is defending themselves against a well-planned military-level effort, intended to reveal years of wrongdoing. When twilight descends onto Millfield, Zora stood outside her new, safe place gazing out at the town where she had spent the view brings up memories of her early years that she seldom ever lets herself go back to. Years early, 10-year-old Zora had stood outside this same courthouse clutching her father's hand when he attempted to report the cops who had broken into their house in a drug-related incident. Raid, no narcotics were discovered. But because of her, the family savings money was retained at home. Father's fear of banks after a history of unfair lending practices was confiscated as suspected. Her father had spoken in a defeated tone, and they wouldn't even look at us because of the drug money. Since the clerk declined to give the appropriate paperwork, this was the first time she'd witnessed a system intended to shatter her proud, powerful father into 2 years later. After police raids drove away participants, the community center where her mother taught music had to close. Zora had been given direction and purpose by the same community center that had helped keep many children off the streets. One of them was able to discover concentration and discipline through programs that directed her energy toward constructive avenues. That the community center is still there, but developers are threatening it today. Connections to Marcus Reynolds, the same individual involved in the drug trafficking scheme. Wilson defends the same developers who stand to gain significantly if the less affluent areas of the city can be purchased at a discount. Zora's motivation for revival is now recognition rather than merely justice, that Wilson and his dishonest associates are not only pursuing random people, they are methodically weakening the community by fostering fear, eroding trust, and removing support. Wilson and Sergeant Miller meet at a dimly lit tavern across town. This was meant to be simple, Miller hisses from their typical haunts. Another conviction, another arrest, and another mark for the promotion board. Next, through their difficult conversation, Wilson's hostility reveals the truth this month. Has been more than simply prejudice. It's been a deliberate effort to increase his arrest rates ahead of the next review. For Detective, every conviction is a step closer to the desired gold shield. Years in the role that would ultimately grant him authority and stature outside of his patrol responsibilities. The more arrests, the more. The idea was for him to move closer to his promotion. I need this promotion, Miller. Understand the amount of money we've invested to make it happen. What neither guy understood was that federal agents are recording their talk at a neighboring table as part of Zora's extensive operation to apprehend the whole crooked network as well as Wilson's offenses. When Zora got back to her makeshift lodgings, the security guard gave her an envelope. It had no return address or identifying markers and was placed at the main desk inside one picture of Zora's aunt's home that has a red X on it and A-type memo. Abandon the lawsuit or else they will suffer next. This is a desperate amateur threat. The labor of experts, but of a guy witnessing his world fall apart. Wilson's. He is displaying panic because he is unable to comprehend, knowing he just threatened someone a Navy SEAL loves, which is the greatest mistake a strategist can do. Zora was not scared by the picture. Rather, it altered and centered her. Wilson has just made certain that the meticulous pursuit of justice was transformed into an even more potent personal goal. Commander Zora Daniels won't let up until justice is fully and absolutely restored. As the D-Day approaches, the courtroom becomes quiet as the judge names the case. The intensity in the air during the Ohio State versus Zora Daniels match was not the normal, everyday stress of court cases. But there's a deeper primordial strain in the air before a storm judge. Harmon paused and looked around the room, his eyes strained. The gallery was remarkably packed for a preliminary hearing, with the majority of people he didn't recognize. Captain Hargrove is seated right in the center of the room, surrounded by stern men and women with military demeanor. The support officer makes a quiet statement behind the defensive table. Wilson appears confident as he takes the stand, but those who are closely observing him may spot faint indications of stress. Restless tapping of his fingers against his thigh and stiffness around his eyes when he didn't say anything, but he perspired in several spots through his immaculate suit. Despite the prosecutor, Wilson, starts by describing the nice air conditioning in the courtrooms. Wilson recounts before the court what transpired before the defendant was taken into custody. Rendition of events with practiced accuracy, the regular traffic halt, the alleged hostility of the suspect, the unexpected assault that damaged him. Wilson says that she approached me unexpectedly after finding illegal prescription medicine, referring to he used some sort of military battle method to exaggerate the marks on his face with makeup. My injuries may have been more serious if I hadn't had defensive training. Jeremy Wells, Zora's public defender, rises for during cross-examination. His manner suggested that he was asking someone who was going through the movements. But then an unforeseen circumstance occurs, Your Honor. Wells declares at once again, the defense would want to present Judge Advocate General's Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen. Who will succeed Commander Daniels as counsel, causing a cascade of Wilson's expression flickers with doubt as astonishment permeates the courtroom. The United States is honored as Chen moves closer to the bench qualifications. The Navy is interested in these proceedings because a distinguished officer is being charged with a crime that might have an impact on. Judge Harmon examined her qualifications before nodding the court in situations pertaining to national security. Acknowledges Lieutenant Commander Chen as the defendant's counsel. The change in. There is a noticeable change from the usual situation of a citizen against local overtime. Law enforcement has evolved into something very different. At the defense table, Zora maintained her composure and maintained her ideal stance. Look unwavering, in contrast to most defenses that falter under the pressure of the proceedings. She sits with the calm assurance of someone confronted with circumstances far worse than a courtroom. Chen's method of, because she is surgically exact, cross-examination, is not at all like what Wells would have been. Officer Wilson, you testified that my client was horribly prepared, hit you in the face, causing the injuries you're showing now, isn't that right, Wilson? Answers. I'd like to present defense exhibit, gesturing to a technological expert who mentions dash. The unedited footage from your patrol car's dashboard camera is displayed on the carbon displays. When Wilson gives Zora directions, she stands, with her hands while the video plays in crystal clear, always visible on the car. The pivotal moment comes. Wilson. He then abruptly stumbles back, gripping his face, although the camera angle makes it obvious that Zora. Officer Wilson, I've never moved. Would you mind explaining how the defendant struck? Wilson switches the car for you without removing her hands. Unfortunately, not everything is seen by the angle. Possibly this angle will be. Chen proceeds to provide further illumination by presenting a second video clip from. The action was obviously filmed by a nearby business's security camera from a different angle. Shows Zora staying still while Wilson does his dramatic stagger. The prosecutor raises an objection, but Chen calls her first and moves on. Dr. Elaine Tremble, a forensic medical expert witness. Dr. Tremble, you have seen at the photos of Officer Wilson's purported What are your conclusions about the injuries sustained both immediately following the arrest and today in court? The doctor highlights important areas. When applying a laser pointer to specific regions, the marking patterns don't match impact trauma from a blow. The coloring and lack of swelling advancement are indicative of blood force trauma. Pattern points to either self-inflicted small abrasions or artificial augmentation. Hit from someone else's fist or palm. Wilson's visage grows gloomy as his medical science's methodical debunking of injuries is followed by even more damaging data. Your Honor, the prosecution presented body camera footage of Wilson together with a technical examination of the mysterious 47-second lapse that occurred exactly amid the purported attack on our technical. Wilson may be seen in the retrieved video. After an expert has recovered the erased material, he reached up to momentarily switch off his body camera after purposefully averting his dash camera's gaze. Before re-enabling it and alleging attack officer Wilson Chen continues. Her tone was measured. But did you persistently falsify official records? By Wilson stammers. Therefore, I'm removing this tape since there must have been a mechanical issue. Fault that magically fixed itself in a matter of seconds and matched exactly with the claimed attack later. As Chen summons Officer Diaz to the state, the situation keeps getting worse. His testimony stands in stark contrast to Wilson's description of the evidence gathering, which showed that Wilson had gone by herself to examine Zora's vehicle after she was taken into jail and completed. Jen asked, "No, ma'am," and Officer Wilson followed the correct procedures for processing evidence. According to Diaz's testimony, the medications were never correctly recorded in the chain of, with every bit of evidence and every witness. Custody was violated several times. Wilson's case falls apart even further, and the prosecutor, realizing the catastrophe, tries to save what she can via procedural arguments and objections, but Chen rescues the day since the truth has gathered too much momentum to be restrained. Last but not least, the defense would like to share her most potent revelation, to present Wilson with Commander Zora Daniels' service record as proof. Already in shock by the methodical breakdown of his case, he watches in increasing terror as Chen offers a Commander Daniels' document to the court. As Officer Wilson adopted an administrative, she is a seasoned Navy SEAL and one of only 3 members of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. There was a whisper that women may be sent for special operations after completing SEAL training. Everyone was placed on a hot seat in the courtroom as Chen continued. As additional information came shown that Commander Daniels received the Silver Star for valor in, she received the Defense Meritorious Service Medal and 3 Purple Hearts for fighting, has overseen more than 30 high-risk, successful missions in war zones across the mastery of several martial arts disciplines offered to special education students, is part of her hand-to-hand fighting training worldwide. Commander Chen, a force operator, stops to let the significance to set in. Officer Wilson believes that Daniels actually hit him, causing serious injuries that made the concept clear. It is honestly shocking that someone with her level of experience would have left minor scars that might be concealed with cosmetics. Ridiculous. Wilson looks at Zora with fresh eyes, suddenly seeing what he's been facing the entire time. Not just another defendant to threaten, not simply a warrior with strategic thinking and rigorous training, but another instance to manipulate thinking far beyond his own. And Chen goes on to say that Commander Daniels was in Millfield was placed on approved leave after a secret surgery that needed her response to intense physical activity and situational awareness. Officer Wilson exhibited extraordinary restraint throughout his wrongful arrest. Judge Harmon, who has been observing the proceedings with growing worry, turns to Wilson, the officer in charge of aggressiveness. Wilson, do you want to change your testimony about what happened in light of this evidence? The subject remains open, giving Wilson a chance to rescue a tiny bit of respect by admitting his falsehoods, but pride and desperation triumph over knowledge. Therefore I stand by. My testimonies, Your Honor, are the last straw in his carcer. Perjury has now been added to. For the first time since the hearing started, Zora's growing legal issues gave herself permission to grin just a little bit. Not with triumph or retaliation, but with justice. Ultimately emerging from the institutionalized corruption that has afflicted her village, Whatever once threatened the neighborhood where she was raised and shattered, her father's soul is now confronted by the unwavering brightness of Officer Blake. Wilson in truth believed they were dealing with simply another. The susceptible victim realizes too late who he decided to target. As the evidence against him grew, a woman trained to demolish dangers far more serious than his Officer Blake Wilson's. Poise breaks the calm, collected manner that has been his hallmark for 15 years on the force, disintegrates in front of the court. These charges are ludicrous, asserts that this is a planned assault against the law, with each phrase growing in volume. Harmon, who has observed the events with increasing confidence, has enforced the law against me personally, slowly takes off his spectacles, and his voice bears the burden of 3 decades of administering justice after examining the evidence put forward by both parties. This court discovers a lot of procedural infractions, and important Officer Wilson's testimony has inconsistencies, as the evidence plainly demonstrates that the purported evidence was handled incorrectly and that the defendant did not assault Officer Wilson as stated. Wilson's knuckles whiten as he is placed, at best purposefully, at worst holds the witness stand as the final traces of his professional demeanor disappear, and the accusations against Judge Harmon has dismissed Commander Daniels with prejudice. Moreover, I am forwarding this case to the District Attorney's Office for further examination. Officer Wilson may have engaged in criminal misbehavior. This is the tipping point after 15 years of the little-known bias of unbridled power of a system that allowed, instead of being controlled, his worst tendencies all erupt in a flash of unbridled rage because she's, Wilson yells from the witness stand. Isn't it military? If she were simply the racist insult he almost spoke hangs after he realizes it too late. Unspoken but evident in the atmosphere of Judge Harmon's courtroom, Officer Wilson advises you to keep your cool in my courtroom. But Wilson is unaffected. You people are uncontrollable today. The system is rigged, and she's Judge Wilson interrupts abruptly, gesturing to Officer Wilson. No better than any other, that's enough. The fact that you are happy in this court during Wilson's breakdown, Zora stays sitting, her stance unaltered, her face not showing triumph or rage, but a profound, almost melancholy comprehension of this man's. Not only have hatred and corruption harmed his victims, but they have also corrupted him. Commander Daniels' judgment transformed what may have been a sincere desire to serve into something quite else. Harmon tells Zora, "You can leave. This court is sorry for the experience you having withstood." Zora rises with military accuracy. "I appreciate your honor." 3 words. However, they are said with such respect that they contrast sharply with Wilson's unfolding. 2 federal agents emerged from the gallery badges as the Baith got closer to Wilson. The lead agent, Officer Blake Wilson, declares that you are being arrested because evidence manipulation, witness intimidation, perjury, civil rights abuses, and obstructionist conspiracy. Murmurs break out in the courtroom when Wilson is handcuffed, not by justice.local law enforcement, but the importance is maintained by federal authorities. This isn't just about one cop or one instance, so what's the deal with everyone here? The prosecutor asks what this means, but Captain Hargrove responds by getting up from his chair. For a while now, federal investigators have been looking into Wilson's actions as part of a bigger scheme. Commander Daniels' lawsuit, which focused on human rights abuses and corruption, only sped up the process as after being dragged away, Wilson's frantic gaze fell on Zora's. "You set me up," and he spat. Zora steadfastly met his stare, but this was all a trap. "No, Officer Wilson, you said I just made sure that the truth got a chance to be heard. It is the ultimate inversion, with the accused turning into the hunted and the hunter into the accused, the individual who misused authority, confronting the repercussions of his." Reporters gathered outside the courthouse as federal officials made an announcement. Evidence of chronic civil corruption and the wider ramifications of an ongoing probe into departmental malfeasance, rights abuses, and Sergeant Miller's assistance, who has consented to test. This case has shown that he testified against his co-workers in return for leniency. Unsettling trends that go beyond a single federal prosecutor's office declares that, for 3 days, we will follow the evidence wherever it goes. Later, Zora sits across from young Officer Diaz in the community center that was formerly closed. Choice to come out in spite of personal danger in order to deliver important evidence symbolizes everything Wilson did not value. Honesty over expediency, truth over, what gave you the courage to come forward? Zora said, you risked your career. Diaz? I became a police officer to protect people, not to prey, after carefully considering his badge. On them, when I witnessed what was taking place, I was unable to participate in that decision. The more difficult one is what Zora informs him that sometimes the greatest courage isn't the same as sincere service. Confronting an adversary, we are confronting our own institutions and ourselves when they fail their purpose around them. The community center is humming with fresh energy and the latest information on the corruption scandal has led to a flood of funds and support. Children hone their skills on recently given musical instruments, including Zora's own early years, but with a future free from structural injustice, the Diaz outlines the new supervision system being implemented by the department, explaining that body cams cannot be review boards for handicapped civilians with real authority implicit bias training that goes beyond simply ticking boxes. It's a tiny but significant step. 1 week following the dismissal, a community started to recover from long-ignored wounds. When Zora attended a naval ceremony while wearing her formal uniform, the ribbons and her commanding officer pins and the medals on her breast reflect a tale of duty that most civilians can never completely understand. Another accommodation, this time not for gallantry on the battlefield, but for, according to the citation, Commander Daniels exemplified the highest standards of naval service by acting with moral bravery. Actions honored our uniform's guiding ideals as well as herself. Represents a very different scene across town. Blake Wilson sits in his plea deal included a rehabilitation program for former police. The guy who formerly used his badge as a weapon now has to face the biases and shortcomings that changed him from protector to predator. His path to responsibility had only just begun, and more difficult than the route that led him here. Yet in his descent from, there is a chance, although a little one, of redemption from power. Implications. But as the sun sank over Millfield, Zora stood there at last, facing them, laying a little stone on the headstone at her father's grave in silent commemoration of the system that shattered. You did not shatter me, she whispers. And perhaps it is a bit less fractured now. Her leave will finish tomorrow and she will resume her confidential missions, potentially fatal to a world where judgments are made in a split second. But for a warrior, she departs from hometown a little more just than when she arrived. Such like Commander Zora Daniels, that might be the most significant triumph of all. Did you enjoy the story? Like, subscribe, and share to others, so everyone can learn a lesson from it. See you in the next video.